Tágad Carhirig and the Labour Party support this motion. I want to move our amendments to the motion as well, Carhirig. Minister, there's a lot of things that come into your mind when you talk about the national minimum wage. But I suppose we need to picture how a parent feels who has worked a hard week on the minimum wage, and then looks at their children at the end of the week and wonders how they can feed them and how they can clothe them and how they can keep them warm. So within that emotion, there is an element of fear, but there's also an element of humiliation, that you're working so hard, but you have to perhaps make choices between food or warmth for your children. Now, this motion is important because we live in a low-wage economy. 23% of Irish workers are statistically, according to the OECD, in low pay. So it is a massive issue. It is a massive issue. And when government representatives talk about going back to normal, for many people, going back to normal was this grind of working hard to try to provide for your family, but it's still at the end of the week asking these devastating questions to yourself, these humiliating questions to yourself: can I actually feed and clothe and keep this child warm? And all of the presentations we've given to you about the cost of living, indeed our own motion last week by my colleague Jed Nash, who also established the low pay commission when Labour were last in government. All the presentations we've given to you about the reality of Irish life, you have rejected in an argument about tax cuts, that's the way to bring down the cost of living. When we talk to you about the fact that nowhere in Europe do you pay for a GP visit except in Ireland, which families would have to consider as to whether to bring their child to the doctor or not, whether they have the money. They don't have those humiliating decisions to make in other European countries. When we talk about childcare, other European countries don't have the expectation of a second mortgage payment a week. When we talk about going to school and back to school costs, other countries just don't have the expectation of putting your hand in your pocket every time you get a communication from your local school. We have so many things that families are just expected to pay for that you think, your government thinks, can be resolved by a tax cut. We've just had a presentation from the Minister who told us that 520 million was spent in tax cuts. That does nothing for the person on the minimum wage. And again, whenever it is suggested that we increase the minimum wage, you can just predict that employer representatives will come out and say, well, this will have a devastating effect on the economy and devastating effect on jobs. And it has been proven time and time and time again to be an economic lie, because they just don't want to pay the workers. Now, this is actually connected to what has been suggested earlier about trade union recognition. And yes, we do have, unfortunately, not the same collective bargaining rights as other European countries enjoy, and that is absolutely linked to the reason as to why we have such an epidemic of low pay in Ireland. 23% of Irish workers, some people don't believe it, 23% of Irish workers statistically in low pay, and 40% of workers under 30 in insecure work. And all these things we ask you to do around childcare, around school costs, around GP care, around rent, you just won't do. You put it all in the tax cut bracket, which benefits those who don't effectively need any relief when you're comparing to somebody with the humiliating question in their heads at the end of the working week. And so the suggestion that we would increase the minimum wage to something approaching a living wage is something that this government should be embracing. You have a commitment in your own programme for government for the establishment of a living wage. And we are 2 years into this government. This government was elected, or we are all elected, this day 2 years ago. I know the government wasn't founded to this day 2 years ago, but still, we are approaching the midway point of this government, and there's still no energy, no sense of emergency around the low pay epidemic, around the rationale needed to give somebody that basic sense of dignity, that basic sense of pride, to be a member of this society, to engage in this society, to interact with others on the basis of a sense of equality and decent living standards, and to eradicate that humiliating question that you may have at the end of the week. Now, we are suggesting, Minister, as well, in our amendment that this be linked, that the minimum wage be linked to inflation. I think that is a perfectly reasonable suggestion. But again, Minister, we have to grapple with this absolute epidemic. So I say to you again, in any other scenario, in any other country where so many people were working in low-pay employment, when it was disproportionately women, when it was disproportionately migrant workers, it would be at the top of the enterprise agenda. Employer organisations should be mortified. They should be embarrassed. They should be shamed as to how this has allowed to take place, how this is allowed to happen. And again, Minister, it is absolutely linked with the fact that workers in this republic do not feel that they have the same power when they are members of a trade union as other workers would have across the European Union or across the world, because the collective bargaining rights in Ireland aren't strong enough. Now, what do we do if we give somebody enough money to survive the week? What do we do if we give somebody enough money to survive the week? They have a different sense of themselves, they have a different sense of their future, they have a different sense of the country in which they live in, they have a different sense of the community in which they live in, they have a different sense of their, of a vision, they have a different sense of positivity to hand to their children. They can say to their children that this country has your back, that this state has your back, that this government has your back, that your employer has your back, that everybody effectively believes that you have the right to live through your week, to work hard, but be in a position to pay your bills and not have to have this absolutely heartbreaking flash across your brain when you're in at night, looking at your children asleep, wondering, can you feed them, can you clothe them, and can you keep them warm? A living wage is the least we could do so that our citizens can afford to live.